Hey guys, Owen here. I've got an important message today about the dynamic of what's going on in the world right now. And there is, so we just had, for example, oh my gosh, there's so many wild things happening right now in world events, in national events. And there's all these different complex, institutions, the government, culture, you could say on a political scale, like left versus right. There's the media, there's social media, there's the algorithms, and then there's actually like what's happening to people. You might see on mainstream media, you might see them say, oh, well, the way that we know whether things are good for America is like, well, despite what might be happening, there's these markets. Markets are, look at the market is at an all-time high or something like that. Well, guess what? So, for one, the real important thing that's happening in America right now, even though they want you to think the dynamic is a left versus right political spectrum, that is not the actual situation of what is determining what happens. And in a way, this is like regardless of who is the president, regardless of what's happening internationally, and regardless of what the mainstream media is going to tell you, the real issue in America and in the world right now is the concentration of power to the very few at the top. Like, here's an example, if you want numbers. So I had said in a previous video, it was something like 80% of all stocks are owned by billionaires. That might not be accurate, but it's not far away. So get this, out of all stocks, private equity, at least in the United States, like New York Stock Exchange and other things for private equity, 93%. Get that, 93% of all stocks. So every time someone buys something at Starbucks, every time you buy the publicly traded company's product, the profits are 93% going to the wealthiest 10% of Americans. And here's the other side of that statistic, is that the lower 50% of Americans in terms of the financial spectrum, the bottom 50% of Americans, they own less than 1% of all stocks. And we know also on the very top of end of, let's say, the wealthiest 1% of people, they own more than 50% of all stocks. That's just 1%, the wealthiest 1% of Americans. It's wild. It's totally crazy kind of wealth concentration. It's like, and the thing is that when we talk about, oh, what's going on with the economy, where is, what are these forces at play? Well, and they'll be like, oh, these immigrants, man. It's like you're sitting at a table, and let's say representing money is like a cookie, right? And there's maybe you've got like one cookie, maybe, and then there's like, some immigrants on another part of the table. Maybe they've got like a piece of a cookie or even one cookie. And then you've got let's say a table full of 100 people like that, right? And you've got, think of it like that. Think of it like 1% equals one person at a table with 100 people on it. And you've got literally half that table splitting up a single cookie. And then you've got, among just 10 people at that table, you've got 93 cookies. And then there's literally a single person at the table. Among those 10, 50 of those cookies among those 10 wealthiest people at the end of the table, one of them has 50 cookies, more than 50. They've got like 53, 55 cookies. And then the people next to them, they've all got like 10, 20, 30 cookies among them. And so it's like more than 50 cookies with just 10, no, with just one person. One person got more than 50 cookies. Then among those 10 people, they've got 93 cookies. And you've got a table full of 100 people. 90 of them are splitting 7 cookies. And among those 90, you've got 40 of those people splitting up about 40 some cookies, split between about 40 people. Average maybe 1 cookie per person, but it's not distributed like that. There's a couple of the closer to those wealthy 10 who's got a whole bunch. And as you get down closer to the middle, the people are splitting less than a cookie. And then you've got literally 50 people at the table, all each having like a crumb. 50 people splitting up a single damn cookie. That is U.S. economics. But it's literally worse than that, because that's just like stocks and private equity. When you look at actually like wealth holding, it's even worse than that. Even worse. And those people at the end, the person literally, that all of the news information for everyone at that table is coming from that one person with like 55 cookies, telling everyone else, you know what? You know what the real problem with this dinner table is? It's those immigrants who are walking in here trying to take cookies from you guys. That's the real issue. And they've got this stack of all the cookies that these other people have, like not even a cookie, and they've got like 50 of them. Literally, if they were able to somehow get that distributed more easily, maybe through something like taxes, it would be less bad. You wouldn't have people starving and desperate. But anyway, so that's this cookie analogy. And recently, Charlie Kirk, who, so here's the thing. So I used to be what you could call part of like, this left-right spectrum is, by the way, totally inappropriate, because that's like saying like it's either A or B. That's all you get, right? Like, we don't even have more than 2 political parties. It's crazy. There's like no dimensionality. It's either you're that side or this side. And if you're not 100% on board with either one, you just got to super compromise, just go wishy-washy, or just basically jump onto team A or B. That guess what? Both teams are totally, completely just like, they are enslaved by the money that they receive from corporations. The left and the right, not people, but the politicians in office, they must serve their masters who pay the bills, which are the big corporations. Literally, what it is that one person at the table with more than 50 cookies, they're the one who is telling the whole government what to do with the whole table. Everyone else on the table doesn't have a say. Which is why, and it's been proven, regardless of whether or not there's 100% public approval for something or 0% public approval for something, there's a 20% chance the thing is going to get passed. And that's because what people in DC do has nothing to do with public opinion. It has everything to do with corporate opinion. We're living in a corporate oligarchy right now. It's not a democracy. It's a democracy for corporations that have big money. It's a democracy of the highest bidder, which is basically just a bribery fest. And that's the political spectrum. That's how our government functions. So the challenge that we have is this crazy inequality is publicly traded companies. And this thing that, like, and the reason why I brought all this up, okay, again, is that, so Charlie Kirk just passed, he was murdered, killed by someone with a gun, or a group of people who, wanted you to think someone else shot him or something. But anyway, so I wasn't like a big Charlie Kirk watcher. I haven't been watching that much political stuff recently, but since his passing, I really wanted to understand this in the context of like what's going on, what's the deal with Charlie Kirk. And there's a lot of stuff historically that I've heard him say that I personally hadn't agreed with, but when I watched some stuff recently, I noticed actually he was saying a lot of things that I actually did agree with. And this is not to be like, oh, look, the political party that he's kind of mostly backed by is like the right one versus the other one. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is exactly this difference between that they want us to think left and right. But the real issue in America is the concentration of wealth and power at the top, and the total absolute control of information in mainstream media and in, let's say, algorithms and other types of things like government editing these corporations, forcing their information and their algorithm to work a certain way. But anyway, the difference is that left and right is not the question and is not how we should be viewing the world. The world is not that way. It should be who has the wealth and the power and who does not, and who is basically using that wealth and power to corrupt our systems to make things way better for themselves and thereby not better for everyone else because they're not representing everyone else. And that's something that Charlie Kirk, I think, started to talk about. And I've noticed, like, again, too, so I used to be, let's say, a Democrat. Like, I ran for political office, and I ran for office because I'm like, hey, we got to make a change. I did it under, like, kind of, basically I was inspired by Bernie Sanders. And the reason for that is not because I'm like 100% all about all the like main leftist lines in terms of political dialogue, but it's because just like many Trump voters, I was completely basically acknowledging that the system that we have today is messed up, that our government is corrupted somehow because they're not representing people's interests. Something is making it not work for people, and it's making it work for private corporations and wealthy people. And that's what Bernie's platform was all about. It was about not the billionaires. Let's not do things to try to help them because they don't need any help. The people who need help are the average, everyday working family people on, every American who's not a millionaire. They need help. And especially that lower 50% they're splitting a single darn cookie. Things are getting worse in terms of income inequality. Bernie Sanders, his platform was to try to stop that, right? Through policies of potentially taxing billionaires, right? That's one side, right? Basically, taxation is a form of what you could say socialism, trying to improve social conditions for the average working family, right? Or you call it democratic socialism. But the semantics doesn't matter. The point I'm trying to say, too, here is that Donald Trump, the reason why he got elected was because he also was saying, hey, there's a problem. There is massive corruption in our government. I want to stop that, so vote for me. Bernie Sanders was not allowed to run. He was stopped by the Democratic Party, which kind of coalesced, and they all kind of gathered arms and said, listen, all you candidates, we got to stay with the corporate system, the big money system. And we got to band together to stop this Bernie Sanders guy because he was the only Democratic primary candidate who represented going against the big money, corporate-driven political government system. Donald Trump was on the other side of that spectrum. It would have been an awesome match to see Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump and see them debate. Didn't happen. Donald Trump got elected. Donald Trump's in office now. He is representing, hey, I want to change and get rid of corruption in the government, in the system. I don't think that's happening today. You could say, hey, there's a lot of change going on. Yes, huge change. I don't want to get into the weeds of it, but the thing that is the real linchpin here is that the conditions, the economic conditions for Americans today, they're getting worse. And I'm not saying it's all Donald Trump's fault. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the conditions are getting worse, and it's because we're misidentifying what the problem is. The problem is not, oh, the left is in there versus the right, or the left is stopping the right from making change. It's not that. The problem is that corporations, there's nothing stopping them from having more power and from gaining more power and more wealth. So we have to try to change that system, change the corruption in our government. The reason why I mentioned Charlie Kirk, I'm going to mention Candace Owens also, and Tucker Carlson, is because the key aspect of those three people is that they're not representing a publicly traded company, and they're not running for office. And so this thing occurred to me the other day while I was watching these videos of Charlie Kirk speaking and Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson, and they are questioning the system itself, right? And it's not like we don't have other politicians saying that. Particularly Bernie Sanders is still campaigning right now today saying, listen, the system is corrupt. His campaign is now like, basically, instead of not the billionaires, it's now like against oligarchy, which is really what we have. It's not about right versus left. It's about the oligarchy, concentration of power among the super wealthy elites. And I believe Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and Charlie Kirk, because they're not in office, running for office, beholden to money, and because they're not part of a publicly traded company that must do what the board says and do things for profit at all costs, they're independent thinkers and they can think for themselves, and they don't want corruption. And that was the whole point, I thought, of Trump's campaign, the underlying factor of why people were behind him, and also why January 6th happens, was because it's so obvious to the average American that the government and the economic system we're in is not working for the average American. And I believe Charlie Kirk started asking questions that he was not allowed to ask, which is essentially like, there is a spectrum of debate that is allowed, right? This is from Noam Chomsky, I believe. He wrote the book Manufacturing Consent. Also, shout out to Howard Zinn for, he's the guy who wrote People's History of the United States, and also Arundhati Roy. It's three of my favorite authors. But the point is, there's an accepted spectrum of debate that you cannot deviate out of. There are limits to dialogue that politicians in government and people in large corporations, and thereby talking heads in mainstream media, there's things that they cannot say and talk about. There are things that they cannot question. You cannot question the system as a whole. You cannot bring up inequality. You cannot bring up class warfare, which is to say, rich being at war with the poor. You cannot say things that could potentially incite an economic or otherwise revolution, a people's type of revolution, against those in power. Because that is the one ultimate thing that, that's literally what is the most powerful thing in the world? The most powerful thing in the world is united people, is the majority of people, those 50, half the people at the dinner table at the bottom, and then the remaining 40% that aren't in that top 10%. It's that 90% of the population realizing that they're not being screwed by the person next to them that has a fraction of a cookie. They're being screwed by the people at the other end of the table who control all the media, who control all the government, who control all the private corporations, and who are funneling all the wealth into their own pockets and away from the average person, because they get to rewrite the laws again and again, year after year, making things better and better and better for themselves. And they control the spectrum of debate and the dialogue through the mainstream media and talking points and frivolous entertainment, and through creating new threats to fear and new boogeymen that they can point to and be like, that's the problem over there, everybody, make everyone's head turn. The thing they don't want is for average people like us, and especially independent thinkers like, let's say, Charlie Kirk, like, let's say, Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson, especially, I'm not even I wouldn't even consider myself, let's say, a conservative on just like what type of topics, the polarizing talking points that everyone wants us to specifically have an opinion on, as opposed to the vast majority of topics that I would agree with everyone across the political spectrum about how to make our communities safer, better, healthier, etc. We need regular, sane dialogue. But the point is, they're controlling the dialogue. They don't want independent thinkers like Charlie Kirk, Tucker Carlson, and Candace Owens, and also a lot of other independent thinkers who aren't part of the political system, part of mainstream media, and part of the government or part of a corporation saying what they actually think and calling the kettle black if the kettle is black. And right now the kettle is black. And the government's like, no, you can't say that. You can't say the problem is inequality. You can't say the problem is the siphoning and extraction of wealth from the average person and the average city in vast quantities for the sake of endless, infinite profit for the wealthy at the expense of the planet, our health, our bodies, our rights, peace, safety, health, education, everything that makes, every type of human value that we need to have safe, healthy communities. Though all of those things are compromised at the expense of corporations needing to extract more and more wealth and profit. And not just like, okay, here's the amount of profit that we like, we can keep it there. No, it's got to be more and more every time at the expense of everything else, because human values are not part of the corporate boardroom question of how do we make more profit. So the problem is we have these entities in the world that have literally no accountability because they're now more powerful than anything else. And with that power and money, they're able to buy elections, they're able to buy politicians, they're able to buy laws. And it starts to become a more and more dangerous place for independent thinkers to speak up and speak truth to power. If you watch one of Candace Owens' recent videos, she was talking about how Charlie Kirk recently, one of the big pressure points, this is just an example, I'm not trying to allude to anything particularly here, but the point is they were saying he was having a lot of pressure to not criticize Israel, or rather to simply not question it at all, and no question. But there's videos of him starting at least back in 2023 and then all the way until this year of him asking questions about Israel and U.S. policies towards Israel. The fact of the matter is it's an issue if people ask questions, and even if it's not a criticism, just simply asking why. Why is it that the United States is basically talking about Israel as if it was literally like the heart homeland more important than Washington, D.C. somehow. And that the United States must bend over backwards, compromise all of its other things for the sake of whatever essentially is a positive Israeli policy. And that's not an anti-Semitic thing. That's just simply like asking questions, being an independent thinker, asking why. In a democracy and just to have a healthy society, we must be able to question everything. And this apparently huge pressure that Charlie Kirk was receiving was because he was asking questions about things he wasn't supposed to ask about. Tucker Carlson he's been asking questions. He just came out with a documentary about 9/11 and is very vocal that the government story that was told is not true, because there's just all these blatant things that are completely inaccurate. And that the families of the people who passed away on 9/11, those families are still demanding answers to things that they know were told that were not true by the government. And it's not about like, oh, well, what's the deep conspiracy thing? No, it's about we want truth. It should be okay to ask questions, to try to get common sense answers to common sense contradictions and common sense things that don't make sense. Like why did this other building that was 2 buildings away also just collapse on its own footprint at basically free fall speed, looking exactly like a demolition, and some guy who owned the building saying, oh, there was this big loss and we had to pull it. Like I saw that on the news that day. It's really concerning that there's this insane concentration of power. And then on top of it, if you want to add icing to the cake, apparently the Department of Defense and let's say the Pentagon, the military, etc., because you have these layers of need to know policies and secrets within the military, Congress apparently does not have control of the Department of Defense and the Pentagon and the CIA. they are right now in this process due to these UAP hearings that have been taking place, trying to get basic answers to questions and being shut out and shut down by the intelligence community. Like the point is to say it's even more weird and kind of scary in that sense if our own government can't really control its own military. That's weird. But it's true. And maybe they see it like, oh, those people are temporary employees. We're folks who are here all the time. I can understand that point of view. I can understand secrecy for national security, but I don't understand that people in Congress who do have a need to know basis not being allowed to know. Because supposedly we vote them into office, they should at least be able to, know, okay, we're spending X amount of money on something and need to know why. That's why we have certain people in Congress who are supposed to have access to everything that's happening in the Pentagon, to know, can we have oversight over what's happening in our name, the stuff that we pay for, tax money pays for, that they know what they're doing and they're not just running amok doing whatever they want. So all this is to say that we're living in a crazy time right now, and the best thing that we can do is to realize that there are people at the end of the table who have all the power and all the wealth, who are hoarding it, and they are trying to tell us that the problem is your neighbor next door and not inequality. They're trying to say the problem is the immigrants coming in, or the criminal, the desperate poor people in your city who are committing crimes, and not this insane concentration of wealth that's making so many people poor and desperate. They're going to try to say the problem is it's the left, or it's the other side, as opposed to, no, it's this money making wealth concentration machine that completely controls our government. They're going to say, oh, it's the threat of the bad guy overseas, and they're not going to say, maybe we should look at who is donating money in our government and controlling our own politicians and stopping them from being able to do things that are actually in our interest, America's interest, or just humans' interest, instead of the interest of some private group that's giving them all the money. So if you track the money, that's the real answer. And as a citizen, I think it's really critical that we start listening more and more to independent voices from all sides. We need as much information as we can get. We cannot be dependent on mainstream media. Do not sit at that table and listen to the one person who controls more wealth and power than the rest of half of that table. Do not listen to the media and information coming from that 10% that own 93% of all the power and money, ignoring then the voices of the other, what is that? If they own 93%, how much is left for everyone else? 7%. You have to listen to the rest of people. You need to listen to normal people who are not coming from publicly traded corporations. You need to listen to independent voices that are not running for office. Try that. Try getting your information not from the publicly traded companies. And while you're at it, try to not buy products as much as you can. Don't just give money to the people who already have tons of it who don't need it. When people are selling something, what do you think is a better way to improve that situation at the table? Should we be buying constantly products from that one person who's got 55% of all the cookies? Or from those 10% of people who own 93% of all the cookies? How is it that they got all those cookies? Maybe it's because we keep buying all the things from them. What if we started creating a system that made it easy to buy things from your neighbor and buy things from someone else's neighbor in another city? Buying things from businesses based on people that value human values. What if we did that? Let me tell you, that's going to start happening ASAP. I'm a web designer. I'm going to build this website. It's going to start as a directory for local businesses. It's going to be starting as a way for anyone who jumps on. There'll be a list of principles, including we're going to try as a consumer and as a business to try to less and less purchase products and source materials from publicly traded companies. And we're going to try more and more to buy things from all the other people-based businesses, privately owned, small, medium-sized businesses around the country and maybe around the world that value human values, that recognize that inequality, concentration of wealth, and corruption of our government and news media and corporations is the problem with the world today. And that the solution is people buying things from people doing business with other people, and people listening to other people in independent minds, and not those 10 people and that one person at the table that control 93% of everything. That's how we do this, guys. It's not that hard. I'm going to help do my part. I'm going to start this system. If you don't have a business yet, maybe think about starting one, because imagine having a marketplace where you don't have to compete with the big corporations. That's what I'm going to try to create for us. It's going to start as a directory for businesses. We're going to have a list of principles everyone who's on that platform is going to be agreeing to. I'm just going to figure what that is, and I'm going to start some type of a chat system where everyone who wants to be part of this movement can join and start making their voice heard and have a conversation around this. I think I could also probably start that conversation on like X maybe, or someplace, or Discord. I want it to be something accessible for everyone and something free. And I recognize that at the start, it's not easy to suddenly go, cold turkey and suddenly not buy things from big corporations, or not use the cell phone network, or not use the internet, or not use this or that. I get that. But you start incrementally and you start building, and eventually we start to have enough power and have enough buying power that it makes it easy, or easier for the first time, for an independent minded business that has these principles in mind to start that company that does the thing, and to be able to replace that other product that until now you could only buy from big corporations. That's how this works. People can do this. We can purchase things from people. And we can build a movement that is not about left and right. It's about making things better for the average person, and making it so that people can start actually getting wealthy. People can start having abundance. Communities can start creating their own things. And we can start having a vibrant marketplace, in a way sort of like a farmer's market. It's local people, but it's online, and you can buy across state borders. You could buy maybe across international borders. The point is, it's about businesses that care about certain principles. And that's what we're going to build. You can be part of it. I want you to join. I'm going to call it Buy Local to start. So please join me. Subscribe to this channel. Like this video, please. And stay tuned. Thank you. Love you.